and a neurologist and a professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania. Her talk for today is Who Threatens Free Expression Within the American University and Democracy? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Amy Laura Wax.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm very happy to be here. I have a lot to say, and I'm going to try to be brief because I don't want to steal time away from my husband, who's next up. And actually, he's presenting a paper we wrote together, so I'm really stealing time from myself. So I'm going to talk about the threats to free expression in our society, American society, but what I say, of course, is common to a number of other societies, including in the Anglosphere, but in Europe at this point. And I'm going to talk about how that relates to threats to our democracy as a whole, because I think it is very intimately related. And I will skip over some of the details here, but I will do my best. Well, I will just put my cards on the table. In my view, the main threat comes from an ideology and ideas and practices it's spawn that you'll all be familiar with. It goes by the name of wokeism. It really has crept into all aspects of our society, media, nonprofits, journalism, the professions, all the sectors controlled by our elite so-called educated class. And those threats, I think, come overwhelmingly from the left, indeed the far left, the progressive left, although conceitedly these are now under some pressure from the Trump administration, and I will talk a little bit about that. Although in my view, it has yet to make a significant dent, and I really think that the universities are just poised to return to their old ways as soon as they get a chance. Now, I recognize also that these are not the only threats, the threats from within. There's constant complaining in the mainstream media about the Trump administration's attempts to control expression and academic freedom from the right. And I don't deny such pressures exist in pockets, but I do not think they're as important or as consequential as the threats from the left, and especially from the education sector, which is so important in shaping the minds and opinions of our young people, right? So this is really, I think, much more important. I am going to identify 3 trends in universities and society, bleeding out into society, that I think are critical here. And I'm going to do a sort of little bit of an alliteration. Each of them starts with the letter F. First and foremost, there is falsehood. And what is falsehood? Why am I saying falsehood? Well, woke ideology issues in a kind of moral certainty about reality, certain facts, the way the universe is, and oppresses and suppresses any ideas and opinions and just statements that do not comport with their ideas of truth and reality. And that, of course, spawns censorship. It spawns self-censorship. It is completely antithetical to free thought. And I will talk a little more about that. The second is really what I call fragility. But by fragility, I mean something specific. It's the rise of what I would term traumatology, the tendency to psychologize, subjectivize, and expand on the concept of harm through these offshoots of harassment and hostile environment, and to demand a psychologically safe environment. And these are weapons, they're really unanswerable weapons to justify censorship of all kinds. And third, and it's everywhere. Traumatology is everywhere. The third is feminization. Now, I'm a woman. I'm supposed to be in favor of feminization. I'm not. Right? The feminization of education, of the universities, other aspects of our society, undermines tolerance for alternative viewpoints and debate and rigorous inquiry, and leads to the censorship of unpleasant ideas in the name of protecting vulnerable groups. Okay? All right, so taking in these in order. The rise of woke. Well, what is woke? It divides the world into oppressors and oppressed. It identifies Europeans, Americans, white people, the Western way of life as oppressive and bigoted, with disadvantaged minorities and third worlders as the victims. And woke's disdain for the West extends to contempt for free thought and speech. These people are not fans of freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Quite the contrary. These are regarded as the tools of racist white hegemony, right? So not a priority. Far from it. In addition, and Mr. Reader mentioned this, woke sees all inequalities and deviations from strict equality as illegitimate, as the products of bigotry, of discrimination, of injustice, etc. And why does this ideology, this idea, this obsession with equality, in fact, threaten free thought? Because insisting on strict equality of outcomes and adopting the belief that only discrimination stands in the way requires suppressing facts that are contrary to that. And there are plenty of facts that are. There's strong empirical evidence, both historically and present, that not all groups and all peoples and all cultures are the same in competence, capacity, contributions, and the like. And this ought to be obvious to any honest person, right? Yet this observation can't be expressed in polite society, and even people on the right resist it. They're embarrassed by it. There's also good reasons to deny that all inequalities are the product of bigotry. Once again, I think it is fair to say that individuals' choices and behaviors and decisions do enter into inequality. They have an interest, they have a input into some of the inequalities that we see. Okay, so that's sort of the falsehood observation. The woke ideology also leads inexorably to double standards in the treatment of ideas. Right, so we have the division of the world into oppressor and oppressed. And that means that attacking or even lying about oppressive groups is allowed or encouraged, but criticism of the oppressed, however valid, is forbidden, right? And this attitude has actually been brought home in my own life. It can be found in my institution, PEN, which permits open expression of pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli opinions, but has little or no tolerance for any negative commentary about other groups higher up on the intersectionality hierarchy. And based on that, based on the sacred status of women and blacks, many statements that I have made, you might be called gender and race realist statements of fact, right, have been punished as, quote, inequitably targeted disrespect. That is what I am accused of. And I am currently on a year-long suspension. They've taken away my office, my ID card, half of my salary. I am persona non grata at Penn because of my inequitably targeted disrespect. Likewise, woke ideology's Manichaean division of society into evil and virtuous promotes a moral certainty that undermines tolerance for different ideas and actually moralizes ordinary political opinion. Right? And this is a threat not only to the education system, to the rigorous pursuit of truth, of course, to free inquiry, but to democracy itself. Because without tolerance for differing positions and ideas, democracy cannot exist and will never exist. And this is something that is often overlooked. Our insightful founder, James Madison, in the Federalist Papers, which nobody reads anymore, and I highly recommend, understood in one of his most profound insights that free societies will always have what he terms faction. Faction. What does he mean by faction? A free people will always differ in their ideas and priorities and will never converge towards complete and perfect consensus. That complete and perfect consensus which progressives, Wilsonian-type progressives, expect will occur when everybody is properly enlightened and properly informed, right? James Madison would reject that decisively. What democracy requires is that we learn to live with disagreement and tolerate it, hold our nose, look away. And this is very hard for people. We have to grudgingly recognize a loyal opposition and restrain our impulses to destroy and persecute our opponents. And that is happening today in the United States from both sides. But once again, I will say far more from the left, right? If you actually look at surveys of who rejects, who is more likely to reject people who disagree with them, it's far left, college-educated women. Those are the most intolerant people in our society, right? But what I tell people is, and they don't want to hear this, the rest of the world will never have nice things. Places like Syria, the Arab world, the Muslim world, the global South. They are not equipped for democracy because they didn't get the memo about how to treat a loyal opposition. Right? So you can have regime change in Iran or Syria or, in Egypt or whatever country you want to talk about, and it won't improve things because the people who get into power say, now we're in power. Now we're going to crush the opposition. Right? And this is a simple idea, but people don't really seem to get it. Okay. And of course we have Abraham Lincoln, one of our wisest presidents. And he gave several talks in which he said, we must resist, even in the wake of this terrible civil war, turning dissenters into the enemy rather than regarding them as our fellow Americans. That is the path to toxic polarization. He said, the Confederacy, they are not our enemies. They must be our friends. They are our fellow citizens. Kind of crazy, huh? Because they had just finished killing one another. Now, the second monstrosity spawned by woke ideology is this tendency to psychologize and subjectivize notions of harm, right? And is this idea that vulnerable, marginalized groups must be insulated from facts, opinions, ideas that are in some sense unflattering to them, perhaps, or distressing, that they find offensive or simply disagree with, because such speech can cause them harm in the form of mental trauma and distress. So this is the demand for a safe environment, free from upsetting thoughts and ideas, which now pervades higher education and society as a whole. Now, this is an abuse of the so-called harm principle. Anybody who knows about John Stuart Mill articulated a harm principle, for better or worse. He said the only justification for government meddling in our lives and regulating our thoughts and our actions is if it leads directly to the harm of others. Right? And we have to actually prove that harm. And that was a way of limiting government intervention, of limiting interference with thought, of cabining censorship. Well, it has been turned on its head by subjectivizing it and used to extend censorship, to extend intrusion, to undermine free thought. And the way it's done is very clever because progressives are nothing if not very clever. They say, harm is subjective. Harm is psychological. If the person who is offended and upset by what you say says that it is traumatizing to them and harmful to them, that's all you need. And of course, that is irrefutable. How do you counter that? You just have to sort of sit there and take it, right? Well, of course, that wildly expands the concept of harm. We've done it through extension of harassment and hostile environment law, this creation of safe spaces, the deplatforming of nonconforming speakers. It enshrines what our own Supreme Court calls a heckler's veto. the unchecked right of those upset or offended by speech to shut it down. Now, the American courts under First Amendment law, and of course the First Amendment only applies to the government, it does not apply to private censorship. Big problem, I suppose, although as conservatives we should like that, I guess. The American courts have long understood that recognizing a heckler's veto is effectively gutting the protections of free speech and expression, and it's a pillar of First Amendment law, but has not been honored in the ideology of our educational institutions. And the concepts of sexual and racial harassment have been taken far beyond their original framework to deplatform and penalize dissenters applied to even trivial and trifling statements. There's been a kind of bracket creep in this psychologization. And of course, what does it do? It empowers the so-called oppressed. Frankly, it turns them into oppressors. And this has, and they love that, right? They love that. It's been used against me, right? So students say, well, you know, because Amy Wax has criticized affirmative action or said that blacks, you know, don't do as well on law exams, all of which is true. Okay. But of course is staunchly denied by the people in control, and they hide all the data. Right? We can't learn from this person. If when she stands up in front of our class, it's too traumatizing for us to concentrate on civil procedure. She's unfit to be a professor. And of course, you know, what's the answer to that? There is no answer. I mean, how can I prove that that's nonsense or that's made up? I can't. So my administrative, you know, the officials of my law school just credit them. And they've taken me out of the classroom for required courses. They've, you know, done other things to protect students from me. This is all sort of part of the coddling of the American mind, you know, with Jonathan Haidt has talked about. And it's very, very difficult to counter because there are, you know, instances, I think, where there is credible harm and trauma from what people do or what people say. So Jonathan Haidt says it's devastating to adolescents and young people to be looking at screens all day, to have their whole life be moved from, you know, real life, real people, real interaction to online. This has had very harmful effects. I think as conservatives, that kind of appeals to us. Right? But that is a form of traumatology, if you think about it. So how do you draw the line between bogus claims of psychological harm that are weaponized against dissenters, because they are, and, you know, plausible claims of psychological harm, which really seem to have some evidence behind them? This is really a challenge. Finally, a key enemy of free thought today is the phenomenon of feminization. So all right-thinking people, you know, hold the view that more women is better. We have to open up the channels of opportunity to women in the name of basic fairness. It's very hard to argue with that. But it has had some very negative effects. This is going to, you know, some people are going to consider this a very controversial statement. I have trouble identifying the institutions and entities that have been improved by having more women in them, right? The problem with feminization of the universities, let's start with the universities, right, is it elevates feel-good and emotional priorities and the pursuit of psychological safety, personal and group equity over more traditionally masculine values and virtues, which are the original founding values and virtues of the modern Western university, or of the Western university, which of course has contributed greatly to the world and its progress. Equal outcomes are regarded as more important than competence, excellence, merit. Self-regard of vulnerable and oppressed groups are elevated over objectivity, rigor, the search for truth, the preservation of Western cultural values and achievements. And I'm saying this stuff, but there's data to support it. There is a psychologist named Corey Clark. She was at the University of Pennsylvania as a fellow. She now teaches at New College in Florida. And she has done studies that show that men and women in academia assign different average priorities to truth-seeking and discovering new knowledge versus shielding vulnerable victims from upsetting ideas and facts. And women much more commonly emphasize protection. Women professors, women academics much more commonly emphasize protection. And women are more willing to suppress or deplatform speech that they deem dangerous, upsetting. They're more willing to censor. Women are more willing to censor. And I have said, in my own words, women have imported the values of the nursery and the kindergarten into the grown-up institution of academia, and not to good effect. Right? I believe that reordering priorities along feminized lines with the other aspects of ideology has been a negative thing. It has not, I think, improved our universities. And of course, the students have gotten on the bandwagon too. They have learned that the way to control who teaches them what gets taught, the facts that they're exposed to, is to adopt these feminized ideas, these feminized priorities. And this, of course, extends to an assault on Western values generally. Right? Disdain for the concept of objective truth, the obligation to tell it, a casual attitude towards falsehood and distortion towards people who are dissenters like me, not on board. One of the features of the case that has been ongoing for years against me at Penn is the degree of duplicity and mendacity, which I have found stunning and shocking, in the claims that have been made against me. I mean, there's just a lot of outright lying. I could go into detail, but I won't. So in the final part of my talk, I want to shift gears a little and talk about Trump. So I am going to be a little bit critical of Trump here. I am a Trump voter. I am a Republican. I consider voting for the Democratic candidates unthinkable. I would not say that I am, a big MAGA person or anything, but I appreciate some of what Trump is trying to achieve and some of what he has achieved. And one of his targets is higher education, because higher education is this very wealthy, very influential bastion of far left thought, woke thought. He knows that. The people who work for him know it. And they've been trying to tame that through various devices. I'm not going to sit here and defend every single thing that he's done, because the program has been a complicated one. And I think it has had only, as I said, partial efficacy. I want to hone in on one specific initiative that the Trump administration has engaged in. And that is the measures that they have taken to try and quell anti-Semitism on campus, what the administration identifies as anti-Semitism on campus. And a lot of this has taken place in the wake of the events of October 7th, several years ago, has kind of broken this wide open. Okay. Now, I am 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. Now, that doesn't mean I don't hate Jews, right? Because we've got plenty of those. But I know I am a very pro-Israel, pretty much 100% pro-Israel. I'm very proud of my Jewish origins. I would say that I am very pro-Jewish, but I do not think that Trump's efforts to extirpate, I'm not going to say so-called anti-Semitism, I'll just say anti-Semitism, have been fruitful, and I think they have been misbegotten. So let me give you the reasons why I think that. Number one, the concept of anti-Semitism is inherently vague. It doesn't have a legal definition. I mean, racism is bad enough. Racism is hopelessly vague, and you ask different people, you'll get many different definitions, but at least we have a little bit of law on the topic. Some of it is controversial. Not everybody agrees with it, but we have a little meat on the bones. Anti-Semitism has nothing like that. Now, I'm not saying anti-Semitism doesn't exist, because I think it does. And when you go online, especially in the writersphere, which I do, you do see it. I guess you could say it's like pornography. You know it when you see it. And I think a part of it is just this kind of obsessive, conspiracy-minded focus on Jews as behind every evil, as controlling every aspect of, society in a negative way. And that kind of obsessiveness that can get quite excessive, that's kind of anti-Semitism on the right, but then you see it on the left as well. And on the left, it has other elements, because Jews are successful, so all success is plunder. There is no such thing as legitimate success and earned success. That's kind of a central tenet of progressivism. All success is illegitimate. So because Jews are so successful, so wealthy, they must have been guilty of terrible crimes. They're identified with the West, with Western values. They're identified with rootless cosmopolitanism. Although they're very ethno-national about themselves, they tend to be hostile and globalist to other ethno-nationalisms, and that's resented. I mean, there's multiculturalism comes in here, and also the championing of Muslims and Arabs as oppressed peoples. So put this all together and you've got a very unholy brew. But I digress. Right? Anti-Semitism is ill-defined. So what does that mean in practice? When you go up against anti-Semitism or after anti-Semitism on campus, you are necessarily going to end up compromising strong free expression rights. And I am very much pro strong free expression rights. I'm really a kind of First Amendment fundamentalist. Now, the First Amendment doesn't apply to private institutions in our country, but many of our private universities say, well, we follow the First Amendment. We embrace First Amendment values. Well, they do it very selectively. That's for sure. Okay. But I would like them to do it unselectively. Right. The other problem, I think, with going up against anti-Semitism or after anti-Semitism is that it necessarily engages this whole traumatology business, because a lot of what Jewish students are complaining about, not everything, but a lot, is this intimidates me, all of these noisy pro-Hamas demonstrations, and from the river to the sea, and embracing genocide, and talking about how Zionists are like Hitler and all of this stuff. This is upsetting. We're upset by it. Okay? Well, you're upset by it, but, the First Amendment and free expression results in a lot of upsetting things being said. I'm really sorry. Okay? And if the institutions embrace the notion that saying upsetting things requires that these people be punished and shut down, that will immediately be turned against conservatives. Immediately. It has been turned against people like me. Those are the very arguments, the structure of the very arguments that have been made to punish me. So is that worth the candle? I mean, when I was growing up, my parents would say at the dinner table, is it good for the Jews? This was like the ultimate test. And my view is, when you have a policy or an approach, is it good for conservatives? Let's ask that question. I think going after anti-Semites as your primary initiative is not good for conservatives. Okay. Third, race should be the focus of the Trump administration. Why do I say that? Because universities, public and private, discriminate on the basis of race every day in every way. And the fact that the Supreme Court in the Harvard affirmative action case, Students for Fair Admissions, said, no, that's illegal, they ignore them. I know they ignore them. All right, I'm sorry, given the relative the test score gap, the relative performance on academic measures, there is just no way 14% of the class at Harvard is going to be black. All right? You have to have affirmative action of some kind to get that. And yet they continue on their merry way. And there are all sorts of race-based programs. My husband's going to talk about how racial criteria and discrimination pervades academic medicine from top to bottom. It's everywhere, right? So if you're serious about getting rid of double standards, which is what it is, which the Trump administration should be serious about, that is what they should be focusing on. Finally, there are other methods for taming anti-Semitism and extreme anti-Israeli sentiment or anti-Jewish sentiment on campus, right? Number one, time, place, and manner regulations, very strict ones. A lot of what these pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian demonstrators on campus have done is they've occupied buildings, they've set up barriers, they've blocked pathways, they've done physical things. This is not speech, okay? I'm sorry. It is not speech. It is unspeech. They shouldn't be doing it. The universities are entitled to make rules against this kind of thing and enforce them. Here's the problem. They haven't been enforcing them because the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian demonstrators are the darlings of the left, and the left controls the universities, and the faculty are against any kind of disciplining of these people in any kind of serious way, like suspending them or even expelling them. The universities would be perfectly entitled to do that, right? And yet they have not done it, and that is what they should be doing. The second way in which this stuff can be quelled is through better immigration rules and, quite frankly, getting rid of student visas. The student visa business in our country today, the United States, is a scam and a grift. Right? And you will hear all sorts of elevated, wonderful defenses of how, it's all diversity based. It's the cult of diversity. We bring in people from all these different places. They're wonderful. They're talented. We will assimilate them into Western ideas. They will come away and they will love us. They will, spread the American way and the American word. This is exactly the opposite from what happens. You bring foreigners and, from the global south, from the third world, into American universities, and American universities are not places where American values and Western values are being praised and touted and taught. Quite the opposite. They are coming in here to learn to hate America, right? And I'm not exaggerating. And yes, they are acquiring some technical skills, but why are we paying to educate the children of Ghanaian plantation owners and Saudi Arabian princes? I mean, that's crazy. Because every university, save a few in our country, gets millions and billions of dollars of taxpayer money. We have truck drivers and store clerks paying taxes so that Brazilians can attend Harvard. Does that make any sense? I think it makes no sense whatsoever. And luckily, the tide is turning against that sort of subsidy. I think the federal government would be perfectly justified to have a rule that says if you get federal funds, you can only admit American citizens. Now, what does this have to do with anti-Semitism? Well, we have a lot of Muslim students. We have a lot of Arab students. We have a lot of students from other parts of the third world. When those people become students in American universities, or frankly, come and work, on visa programs because they're all of a piece, you are importing anti-Semitism. We are deliberately importing anti-Semitism into our country because, and nobody wants to acknowledge this, these people don't like the Jews. They don't like Israel, and they're not reluctant to say it. Okay? So why would we do that? But I couch that in the broader priority, which is America first. Right? I think that our immigration policy needs serious revision. If I had been Trump, and he's too disorganized to do this, I would have come into office the very first day and said the Hart-Celler Act, which is the 1964 Immigration Act that we are living under today, of course, with a lot of barnacles and revisions and all of this, and, you know, this visa program and that visa program. We're going to repeal that. We're going to scrap it. We're going to start all over. And we're going to have a new regime in this country when it comes to immigration. It's going to be much stricter, much more restrictive, low and slow. What my students don't know is that from 1924 to 1964 in the United States of America, this was our heyday, right? These were our glory days. We had virtually zero immigration in our country. You had to be a Danish rocket scientist to get in and live in the United States. You had to be really, really special. I know this because my son's girlfriend at college, her father was a Danish rocket scientist. And yet, you know, we put a man on the moon. We invented the computer. We did all sorts of glorious and wonderful things. If you've ever seen the movies of the Apollo 13 project, the Apollo control room, everybody looked the same. They were all these white guys with pocket protectors and buzz cuts. And what do you know? Without any diversity, they managed to put a man on the moon. Of course, what people say to me is, but if they'd had diversity, they would have put 10. No, well. Anyway, I think, you know, we have other ways to deal with anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish sentiment, something that we've been working for decades to tame in our country. Anti-Semitism is sempiternal. It's always there. Can I explain it? It's a complicated subject. But, you know, do we want more of it or do we want less of it? That's the question. And that's not to say that, you know, Israel is above criticism or Jews are above criticism. I've gotten into trouble by criticizing Jews on the Glenn Lowry podcast, saying, you know, I think Jews punch above their weight. And there are times when they abuse the power that they have over the culture. They have a tremendous power over the culture in the universities, in the media, in finance, in other sectors. And sometimes they operate as if, you know, their opinions and their preferences and their views and their tastes are the only ones out there, but they're not. They're not. Anyway, that is all I have to say. Thank you for listening, and happy to discuss anything if we have time.